Imagine being told your savior was back, full go, ready to lead the charge, only to find out later he was practicing with the scout team and you'd been sold a highlight that never existed. That's the headline here. Lamar Jackson listed as a full participant on a Friday, ruled out Saturday, and the Ravens hit with a $100,000 fine because someone in the building didn't play the injury report game straight. It sounds small, a box on a form, a label that says full or limited. But sports are built on tiny truths. Fans buy tickets and jerseys because they believe the players they cheer for are the players on the injury report. Opponents prepare differently if a star is active. Fantasy managers set lineups. The NFL treats those little truths seriously because if teams start treating injury reports like theater, the whole system starts to smell like gamesmanship. Here's what went down. The Ravens had Lamar on the report as a full participant on Friday, then later said sorry. No, actually, he was limited and he was only running scout team reps. The league investigated, concluded the mistake was negligence, not malice, fined Baltimore $100,000, and warned that had the misstep looked intentional, that is, designed to mislead for competitive advantage, the punishment would have been far, far worse. We're talking draft pick sanctions in that worse box. That's not a specter the NFL flings around lightly. The Ravens owned it quickly. Their statement was short and to the point. A clerical mistake, cooperation with the league, steps to prevent a repeat. Coach John Harbaugh called it an honest error, and yet even an honest error leaves stains. When Jackson sat that game out, the ripple effects showed. Not just on the field, Baltimore still won, but in trust. Fans wondered who in the building knows what and when. Opponents wondered whether this was a one-off paperwork flub or part of a wider culture that places optics over clarity. Let's cut to the human beat. Lamar. The man's reputation is built on motion and unpredictability. When he's in the lineup, he changes how teams defend. When he's not, playbooks tilt and coordinators breathe differently. For the player, listing status matters emotionally as well as strategically. You don't want to be the subject of speculation about your commitment, your health, or your readiness. And if the club lists you as full while you're only on scout reps, it sends mixed signals into the locker room and into the stands. Is this protecting the player or the team's competitive posture or the narrative? The NFL's injury report rules exist for a reason. They are about fairness to opponents, to bettors, to fantasy players, and yes, to fans, and about integrity. Transparency isn't just a buzzword in football. It's one of the apparatuses that keeps the game from being hijacked by misinformation. When you whisper negligence instead of malicious trickery, you still have to reckon with credibility. $100,000 isn't pocket change, but it's also not a death blow to a franchise. The reputational cost, the shadow of doubt, is the part that lingers. So what is a team supposed to do to avoid this kind of stumble? First, treat the injury report like scripture. Have a single chain of command. One person signs off, another verifies, and a third confirms on camera if needed. Second, communicate internally so players and coaches align with what's released publicly. And third, remember that in an era of 24/7 scrutiny, small inconsistencies get magnified into narratives overnight. The only antidote is clarity. Honest, boring, and unvarnished. There's another angle most people miss, the psychology of decision-making inside the building. When you see a star player rehab like he's ready, coaches get tempted to list him as full to keep opponents guessing. It's an emotional impulse. He feels better, we want to play him, but the rulebook doesn't care about impulses. It cares about what actually happened in practice reps. If he practiced only with the scout squad, that's a fact. You can't dress it up because you want to win a chess match on Saturday night. The rules make sport less like poker and more like fair battle. Now, the league said the mistake looked negligent, not intentional, and that matters. Intention would suggest deception, a deliberate attempt to mislead officials and opponents. Negligence suggests sloppy process, a person or a department dropped the ball. The former is a crime in sportsmanship, the latter is a management failure. Both hurt, but they hurt differently. One makes you suspicious of motives, the other makes you suspicious of competence. The timing of this fine has an odd taste too. Lamar missed that particular game but returned later and helped the team. The NFL didn't change the result. The fine didn't alter a win or a loss. But the message was clear. Sloppy transparency costs you. It costs money, it costs trust, and it chips away at the league's insistence that the book is open to everyone. For fans, there's a practical lesson tucked inside the drama. Don't overreact to a line on a report. Instead, judge the whole film and the whole context. But also, demand honesty. Teams rely on fans' emotional investment. When that investment gets cheapened by mistakes, honest or not, people get wary. You can forgive a human mistake, you can resent a systemic habit. The Ravens statement aimed at the first. The fine tested whether the league saw a pattern or an outlier. And for the league, this is a reminder that rules are only as strong as enforcement. You can have the most elegant injury report policy on paper, but if teams treat it as an afterthought, you need an arbiter to keep everyone honest. The NFL's investigation and the decision to fine shows the league still thinks that transparency matters as much as the highlight reel. In a sport where margins are thin, even administrative margins matter. So what's the lasting image? Not $100,000 on a ledger, not a coach saying, honest mistake. It's Lamar Jackson at the center of a small scandal that's more about process than character. It's a franchise reminded that in the age of endless replay and instant analysis, the smallest misstep can become a story that swells. And it's the league laying down a line. Don't make the injury report a guessing game. If you want a clean takeaway, here it is. The truth in football matters because the game, at its best, requires everyone to be playing by the same rules. When those rules get fuzzy, the game doesn't just get unfair, it gets smaller. The fine won't rewrite the season, but it should sharpen the commitment to clarity. Because in the end, what fans want most is simple: to know who's out there doing the work and to trust that what they see on the field is exactly what they were promised. You know that weird little moment in every NFL season when the game of inches becomes a game of inches. And paperwork? This is one of those. The NFL slapped the Baltimore Ravens with a $100,000 fine after finding the team misreported Lamar Jackson's practice status the Friday before their Week 8 game. A mistake the league says came from negligence, not an attempt to gain a competitive edge. The Ravens accepted the penalty and won't appeal. Reuters. On the surface, it looks like bureaucracy doing its job. A team messed up how it logged a player's participation, the rulebook gets enforced, and the league sends a message. But the reality is a little itchier than that. This wasn't just an Excel cell corrected after the fact. The club initially listed Jackson as a full participant, later retroactively downgraded him to limited, and then ruled him out for the Bears game after it turned out he'd only taken scout team reps on Friday. That sequence is what triggered the league's investigation. Reuters. Why does any of this matter beyond the headline? Because injury reports aren't technicalities. They're one of the few official windows fans, bettors, and opponents have into player availability. The rules exist to keep teams honest and markets fair. When a franchise's public calendar says a superstar quarterback practiced fully 2 days before kickoff, it influences how opponents prepare and how the betting markets move. The NFL's review concluded this one looked sloppy, not sinister, but sloppy enough to merit a fine and a public rebuke. There's also the trust angle. Fans want transparency, media needs accuracy, coaches want predictability. Coaches and trainers tell stories about how a team's credibility with the league matters. Once you get flagged for murky reports, the benefits of doubt evaporate quickly. The Ravens' statement after the fine read like a mea culpa. They called it an error, said they cooperated with the investigation, accepted the ruling, and promised changes to prevent a repeat. That's the right PR move. Own it, fix the process, and move on. But the stain lingers while the season churns. BaltimoreRavens.com. Of course, there's kicker. Lamar Jackson didn't play against the Bears after the confusion, but he returned 2 weeks later and looked like the guy who can flip a franchise's fortunes. He came back for the Thursday night win over Miami and threw 4 touchdown passes that night, which only compounds the irony. The timeline makes people squint. A Friday full practice on paper and out the next day on the depth chart, then a lights-on comeback days later. It's a string of moments that promoters of transparency hate and headline writers salivate over. Reuters. Let's be blunt about the practical football side. The Ravens didn't lose a draft pick and no individuals were fined, which tells you the league's investigators really did treat this as negligence. Had they found intent to deceive or to manipulate information for gambling or competitive reasons, the punishment would have been much nastier. That's meaningful. It signals the league believed this was a compliance failure, not a deliberate attempt to game the system. Still, the reputational cost for a team wrapped up in playoff hopes and national scrutiny can be worse than the fine itself. Reuters now the narrative space. Opponents and commentators will spin this a lot of different ways. Some will say the NFL overreacted. Others will argue it didn't punish enough. The smart take is somewhere in the middle. Rules matter, and the league has to enforce them consistently, but it also has to calibrate punishment to the misconduct's severity and intent. This ruling reads as enforcement with mercy. The Ravens paid a heavy sticker price, but kept their draft equity and didn't see personnel sanctions. That's a calculated balance from the league's perspective. NFL.com for Baltimore. The immediate work is mundane, but vital. Tighten internal processes. Make sure everyone who records practice participation understands the definitions. Starter reps versus scout team reps matters. And build a firewall so the error doesn't repeat. These are the kind of behind-the-scenes fixes that won't show up on SportsCenter, but they do show up on game day when opponents study your injury reports and prepare their game plans. The organization's public acceptance of the fine buys goodwill if the team follows it up with clean compliance. BaltimoreRavens.com. And there's one more layer, the human one. Imagine being a player whose status is being debated in boardrooms and press boxes. The uncertainty around availability is grinding. For the QB, for the coaches, and for teammates who have to mentally rehearse two different game plans. That emotional noise can erode focus. Getting the basics right, accurate, timely injury reporting, is less about appearances and more about giving players and coaches a stable platform to prepare from. The league's message here is simple. Process matters because people matter. The Washington Post. So what's the takeaway? The NFL fined the Ravens $100,000 for an injury report misstep that the league judged negligent rather than malicious. The team accepts the ruling and pledges to fix its process. Lamar Jackson, meanwhile, returned and helped win a big primetime game, which only sharpens the optics but doesn't change the rule. Teams must report accurately. That mix of enforcement and context is the NFL's current posture. Penalties when needed, explanations when warranted, and a constant nudge toward cleaner transparency. Reuters. Final image. Picture the Ravens training room the morning after the fine. Coaches in a meeting, a coordinator sketching clear definitions on a whiteboard, a compliance officer emailing a new checklist. Small, steady fixes that keep a team focused on what matters most. Winning on the field and being honest about the costs to get there. That's the kind of boring, necessary work that wins trust back. And if the Ravens want to move past this, that work starts today.